Thanks.
This is
It's the perfect number of people.
Yeah. Do you want,
Okay.
Do you want to yell again?
No, I'm just gonna see if there's. I saw some people like coming up.
Over here.
I saw RJ coming. Oh no, he's down there. He's hiding behind there. Okay, I think we can start. Okay, first of all, this is a dream come true. Katie, thank you.
You're welcome.
You'll see as I give you this little orientation talk why, but the idea of doing a philosophy conference here has always been a dream, and to continue the tradition and to bring all these illustrious new faces is just wonderful. So thank you all for coming here. My talk is called Building on Questionable Foundations: Nietzsche, Bombay Beach, and the Groundlessness of Our Movement. Thank you and welcome to Bombay Beach. I want to begin by acknowledging what some of you might be feeling right now. You are serious scholars of one of the most important philosophers who ever lived. And you have traveled to what appears to be the end, or at least the edge of the world, to discuss his ideas. Some of you flew into Palm Springs, where, as you may know, they hold a very earnest annual celebration called Modernism Week, devoted to the great mid-century design and architecture of the 1950s. It's a monument to the American dream gone right. And then you drove 90 minutes through increasingly barren desert to arrive at a place where that same American dream has gone spectacularly sideways, or maybe upside down. Some of you came through Imperial Valley, past agricultural fields and border patrol checkpoints. All of you at some point in the last few hours probably thought, where the fuck am I? Where the fuck am I going? Even those of you who live here and spend time here might be wondering, what the fuck am I doing here? You know? Please hold on to that feeling. I think it's philosophically productive. I'll explain why. But first, I should mention that you've arrived at a place where a few years ago we held our own tongue-in-cheek response to Modernism Week. We called it Postmodernism Week. And the framework of postmodernism, of course, lies in the recognition, first had by the man we're all here to discuss, that the foundations of this American dream, and of the whole Western enterprise for that matter, may not have been on as solid a ground as they first seemed. So you've come to the right place for this discussion on Nietzsche. My name is Tao Ruspoli. I'm a filmmaker, a co-founder of the Bombay Beach Biennale, and the chairman of the Bombay Beach Institute for Industrial Espionage and Post-Apocalyptic Studies, a name I'll explain soon. I studied philosophy at UC Berkeley under Hubert Dreyfus in the 1990s. I was digging through and found my old papers from then, and I found my diploma. Okay? It's in tatters. This is what Bombay Beach does, okay? And it says here, the degree of Bachelor of Arts with a major in philosophy with all the rights and privileges thereto pertaining. And this is, I think there's a metaphor in here somewhere, one that will probably make more sense as this talk unfolds. But for now, I'm just going to claim these said rights and privileges by giving this talk. I'm not an academic. It was thanks to Bert Dreyfus that I discovered that academia isn't the only way to do philosophy. It was also thanks to Bert that I discovered Pascal, Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, Dostoevsky, Heidegger, Foucault, Derrida, and the whole existential phenomenological tradition, and the idea that that tradition could be investigated, explored, and furthered through art, filmmaking, and projects like what you see and what we'll learn more about here in Bombay Beach. I'm here today to introduce you to this strange place and to make the case that this bizarre, ruined, beautiful, toxic, impossible little town is the most Nietzschean place on earth. Where am I?
The pigeons agree.
Right? And that what we've been building here on foundations that are in every sense, both literally and metaphorically, questionable, might have something to say about how to live after the so-called death of God, allegedly. Since this is your first day, I feel like I have a duty to orient those of you who are new here, to tell you where you are, why you're here, what this place is. I'll do that through Nietzsche, because I genuinely believe that the story of Bombay Beach is a Nietzsche story, one about collapse and creation, about nihilism and its overcoming, and about what happens when you try to build something meaningful on ground that has crumbling foundations. So let's start with the literal ground beneath us. Bombay Beach sits on the eastern shore of the Salton Sea, California's largest inland body of water. The sea was born from an engineering disaster in 1905 when the Colorado River was breached. Colorado water breached irrigation canals and flooded the Salton Sink for 2 years. 2 years, the entire contents of the Colorado River flooded into this low basin that you see to your right, to my right. Then, for decades, nobody quite knew what to do with this accidental lake. Then in the 1950s, developers saw opportunity. They built marinas, yacht clubs, and resorts. They marketed the Salton Sea as a desert riviera. Frank Sinatra came here. The Beach Boys came here. It was the American dream in miniature. Paradise conjured from catastrophe by full throttle American entrepreneurial will and domination over nature. And then the dream died. Agricultural runoff from the Imperial Valley poured into the sea, raising its salinity levels and toxicity. Fish began dying by the millions. The smell became unbearable. The tourists left. The developers abandoned their projects. By the 1970s and 80s, most of the communities along the shore were in deep, steep decline. Bombay Beach was hit particularly hard. What had been a modest middle-class resort community with 2,500 residents shrank to a population of a few hundred. 90% of the roughly 700 lots that you see around you were abandoned. Trailers that once housed vacationers began rotting into the salty earth. Trash piled up. The Ski Inn, a bar whose name only made sense when you understand that people water skied up to its door, remained open, one of only 2 businesses in town, its walls papered with dollar bills, serving the handful of eccentric souls who stayed or wandered by. Meanwhile, after college, in the late 1990s, I bought an old school bus on eBay. I took out the seats, put 3 video editing stations inside it, and started documenting the edges of American society. We would travel around the country making short documentaries and introducing poets, painters, and musicians to the wonders of digital video, a mobile anarchist video studio on wheels. After a year of living and traveling in the bus, I landed in Venice Beach. And I put flyers around town inviting people to come meet other like-minded individuals. One day, this man walks in with long, messy hair and a scraggly beard, barefoot, chanting here and there. And he comes to one of our community meetings. I welcome him in, wanting to live my ethos that everyone is welcome. And he starts asking, in between his chants, very pointed and specific questions. How did you pay for all this equipment? Do you have 501c3 status? Finally, I ask him, why are you asking me all this? And he says, well, I had a tech company a few years ago that I sold, and I made a good amount of money, and now I wander the earth helping people like you. What do you need? His name turned out to be Freeman. He's here, spoiler alert. And I told Freeman that what we really needed was a building. So Freeman rented us an old powerhouse building in Venice Beach, and we started our first experiment in community building through art and technology. We outfitted the building with pallet racks and invited anyone who wanted to come live and create communally to occupy a space inside the building. After a year of this, I missed my school bus, and Freeman developed a passion for building temporary structures out of pallet racks. And off he went to India. I didn't hear from him for 15 years. In 2003, I got married in the back of my school bus and settled down for a few more years in Venice Beach. I first came here to Bombay Beach in 2007 after seeing a photograph in a bookstore, an Airstream trailer in a puddle of toxic pink liquid on the cover of Kim Stringfellow's book about the Salton Sea. I couldn't believe this place existed only 3 hours from where I lived in Los Angeles. I drove out immediately. I decided to circle the lake, and driving south along the eastern shore, I was convinced I'd reached the end of everything man made. I saw only open desert on my left and this strange, eerily still body of water on my right. And then suddenly a sign, Bombay Beach, 8 miles. I arrived and turned off, intrigued. Walking through Bombay Beach for the first time, I felt something I can only describe as philosophical recognition. This place was asking the questions I'd been asking since I was 18 years old, reading Nietzsche in a dorm room at Berkeley. I was asking them, it was asking them less abstractly and more materially, in crumbling concrete and rusting metal and salt-eaten wood. Part 2, the death of God at the Salton Sea. What happened at the Salton Sea is, in miniature, the story Nietzsche told about Western civilization. A culture builds its identity around a metaphysical promise, progress, mastery over nature, the conviction that human will and ingenuity can transform even an accidental toxic lake into a paradise. For a while, the promise holds. People invest their lives, their savings, their futures into it. The resort town hums with activity, the yacht clubs fill up, and then the promise collapses. Not because someone disproved it philosophically, but because reality asserted itself. The water started to evaporate, the salt stayed, the fish died, and the dream started to rot. Nietzsche's death of God is not, as he took great pains to explain, the opinion of people who merely do not believe in God. It's a cultural event, the collapse of the entire metaphysical framework that gave Western civilization its sense of meaning, purpose, and direction. When the god of progress, of capitalist paradise, of human dominion over nature died at the Salton Sea, the question became the same one Nietzsche posed. Now what? Most people who encounter Bombay Beach respond to this question in ways Nietzsche would recognize immediately. Some respond with nihilism. They drive through, they see the ruin, and they conclude that nothing of value exists here. They feel pity for the residents, or contempt, or nothing at all. Mind you, when I first came here, there was no art. Nothing, okay? None of the sculptures you see around here, nothing. They come to photograph the decay, to shoot music videos and fashion spreads among the ruins. They extract beauty from the collapse without engaging with it, without reciprocity. Ruin porn. This is perhaps the most insidious response because it looks like appreciation but functions as exploitation. And some, a rare few, but each year, more and more, respond the way Nietzsche hoped free spirits would respond to the death of God. They feel what he described in The Gay Science: gratitude, amazement, premonition, and expectation. They look at the collapse and see not an ending, but an opening. The old promises have failed, the old gods are dead, and precisely because of this, something genuinely new becomes possible. Now, as I speak and express how much love I have for this place, I don't want to minimize or understate the catastrophe that has unfolded here. Almost everything that can go wrong in the world has gone wrong here. Ecological collapse, poverty, economic inequality, political neglect, all things that have caused real suffering for humans, animals, and entire ecosystems. Unfortunately, I've experienced many more deaths than births here, too many of them by suicide. None of what I will say is meant to romanticize or sugarcoat any of this harsh reality. This is the landscape you've entered. The ground here is not merely questionable in some metaphorical sense. It's literally corrosive. The salt eats through concrete and wooden house frames. Foundations crack and crumble. Things sink. The air on bad days smells of sulfur and dead fish. The Salton Sea is shrinking every year more, exposing toxic dust that blows through the valley and contributes to some of the highest childhood asthma rates in the state. At the time that I first arrived here, you could buy a house for less than a used VW Jetta. I went home and told my then wife we should buy a house in Bombay Beach. Why would anyone buy a house in that horrible place? She asked, bewildered. In 2011, we got divorced, and a few weeks later, I bought my first property here. By 2016, we had co-founded the Bombay Beach Biennale, and today I live here several months a year, running an institute dedicated, well, let me try and explain what it's dedicated to. When I was 18, the other thing I found in a drawer is all my philosophy papers from 1995, and I started looking through them as I was preparing for this. When I was 18, I wrote my first philosophy paper on Nietzsche. It was about the concept of brief habits from the gay science. The idea that one should embrace convictions, ideas, ways of life fully and passionately, but remain free to release them when their time is up. I contrasted this with Hubert Dreyfus's guidance with Kierkegaard's notion of the unconditional commitment, the knight of faith, who devotes his entire existence to a single defining relation. My argument was straightforwardly Nietzschean. Brief habits allow for growth, unconditional commitment stunts it. Stay free, stay sovereign, keep overcoming. I believed this completely. And for 20 years, I lived it. I founded a filmmakers collective that operated out of a converted school bus. I made documentaries about flamenco, about Heidegger, about non-monogamy. I traveled, I moved on. Each project was a brief habit, pursued with total passion and released when its time was up. Then I found Bombay Beach, and the theory was paradoxically challenged here. Because here's what happened. I couldn't leave. I kept coming back here. I brought friends, filmmakers, philosophers, artists. They kept coming back too. We started buying properties here, many of them for under $1,000. Started fixing them up, hosting gatherings, and gradually, without any of us quite planning it, something that looked suspiciously like an unconditional commitment began to take place. In 2016, my friends Stefan Ashkenazi and Lily Johnson-White and I co-founded the Bombay Beach Biennale. Lily is a philanthropist who's deeply interested in public art and sits on the board of nonprofit art institutions like Creative Time. Stefan is an old childhood friend who people call the Dali of the hospitality world. When Lily and I brought Stefan to Bombay Beach, his then girlfriend Arwen had been telling him about this place too. I didn't know it at the time, but he had been planning an art gathering in a more traditionally beautiful place like Joshua Tree. And when we dragged him down here, he said, the idea shifted from communing with nature to commiserating with it. The gesture of the Biennale, the first one, was deliberately absurd. A tongue-in-cheek commentary on the elitism of the international art world. We brought opera, ballet, large-scale art installations, and an academic philosophy conference to a town that the world had discarded. We did it with two radical principles: no tickets and no commerce. We even subverted the name. A biennale, in my native Italian, occurs every 2 years. We held ours annually, until eventually the etymology of the word asserted its power over us. And as the event grew, we couldn't sustain it every year while maintaining our core values. We surrendered to the name and shifted to even-numbered years. On odd years, we now hold a more intimate gathering called convivium, from the Latin word both for living together and for a banquet or a symposium. It also has a biological meaning. A subset of a species that, living in geographic isolation, evolves traits that distinguish it from the main population. I can think of no better description of this community. Along the way, my partner Dulcinea de Guerre, who's sitting at the other end of the head of the table, and I formalized what we'd been doing into the Bombay Beach Institute for Industrial Espionage and Post-Apocalyptic Studies. The name is deliberately provocative and deliberately absurd. Industrial espionage because we're studying the systems we hope to transform. infiltrating the logic of late capitalism from the margins. Post-apocalyptic studies, because for communities like this one, the apocalypse is not a future threat, but a past event. We are already living in the after. The question is, what do we build here? Now, I want to name what's Nietzschean about all this, because I think it goes deeper than just an analogy. Nietzsche's most radical insight for me has always been that the absence of foundations is not a catastrophe, but a condition of freedom. The total character of the world is in all eternity chaos, he wrote in The Gay Science. Not cosmos, not a divine plan, not a story of progress, chaos. And rather than despairing at this, Nietzsche says, good. Now what can we create? Now we can build, not on the false security of metaphysical foundations, but on the honest acknowledgement that the ground has never been stable. This is what we do in Bombay Beach. We build on questionable foundations. Literally, the salt eats the concrete. And philosophically, we have no guaranteed outcomes, no business plan that makes sense to investors, no theory of change that would survive a McKinsey review. We build because the act of building in a place where everything is falling apart is, we believe, the most authentic response to the conditions that we've inherited. Now, in 2019, just before COVID threatened to end our whole project and stop all the momentum that we had been carefully building, I was telling someone the story of Freeman and our days running the LAFCO, LA Filmmakers Cooperative, powerhouse building in Venice. I kid you not, just 2 or 3 days after telling this story, I get an email. Hi Tao, it's Freeman. I'm back from India. And I see you're doing cool stuff in Bombay Beach. I'd love to come check it out. When can you come? I emailed back. I can be there in 8 hours. I'm in Paso Robles, he said. Freeman drives down, falls madly in love with Bombay Beach, and buys several lots in town, as well as a large 20-acre parcel half a mile outside of town that you can see in the distance if you look there. That will make more sense in a minute.
You know where the buildings are.
The kind of encampment that you see there. He starts building his pallet rack structures, and now every year he invites up to 80 people to live and work out there in an experiment in community, education, and technology, and he calls it Mars College. Eric Kaplan, who spends a lot of time here in Bombay Beach, was supposed to be here at this conference, but hurt his back. I think he's going to give a talk remotely, right? So Eric was getting his PhD at Berkeley when I was an undergraduate. He went on to become a famous TV writer, including for David Letterman, The Simpsons, Big Bang Theory, and Futurama, in which he wrote a character inspired by Hubert Dreyfus named Hubert J. Farnsworth. And Farnsworth teaches at a place called Mars University. It all feels very eternal recurrence, doesn't it? And this brings me to the motto we've developed for this place, which I want to offer to you as a kind of philosophical proposition. I translate it into Latin. Minus sensus facit, magis sensus facit, which means the less sense it makes, the more sense it makes. Let me unpack the motto. Nietzsche understood that the deepest truths tend to present themselves as contradictions. Not contradictions to be resolved, not a Hegelian dialectic marching toward synthesis, but productive tensions to be inhabited. The world is chaos, and this is beautiful. God is dead, and this is a liberation. Existence has no ground, and this is what makes authentic existence possible. Bombay Beach runs on contradiction. It's ugly and it's gorgeous. It's simultaneously decaying and regenerating. It's abandoned and intensely alive. It's dystopian and it's utopian. It's profoundly local and increasingly international. When we host a Nietzsche conference in a place where most residents have never read a word of philosophy, we're not resolving the contradiction between academic thought and lived experience. We're inhabiting it. And the inhabitation is the point. One of the things I wrote, one of these papers I found as an undergraduate, in a paper connecting Nietzsche to Lyotard's postmodern condition was that, quote, in looking for a fundamental character of existence, one must deny that which is most beautiful in life, contradiction. Nietzsche himself put it better. Above all, one should not wish to divest existence of its rich ambiguity. I didn't know at 18 that I was writing a design brief for Bombay Beach, but I was. Everything we've built here is an attempt to preserve and intensify the rich ambiguity that the dominant culture, with its optimization logic, its efficiency metrics, its demand that everything makes sense, is designed to eliminate. Think about where you live and work. Universities increasingly run on corporate logic. Culture is consumed through algorithms designed to minimize surprise. Public space is privatized, sanitized, and surveilled. The dominant systems of late capitalism rely on standardization, predictable consumption, and the elimination of spaces that might foster alternate ways of thinking and of being. Even so-called alternative spaces, the gentrified bohemian enclaves, with the wellness retreats, the curated art fairs, ultimately reinforce the same consumerist logic while performing rebellion. When I was in Venice Beach, I met a great architect named Mark Mack, who had been a professor at UCLA and Berkeley, in addition to building famous houses around the world. Like me, Mark was tired of the consumerist logic of so-called healthy living in the by then soulless, corporatized world of Venice Beach. Same thing in San Francisco, as many of you know. He fell in love with Bombay Beach. Despite the dirty air and the lack of Erewhon health food stores and yoga studios, because he recognized that life here is, in so many ways, ironically, healthier than that. And he bought a house across the street, which you can see there. It's M for Mark Mack Museum. And he called it he built, because if the house was normal, he built the Museum of Unwanted Architecture, a place to celebrate the architecture that was rejected by the rest of the world, designs for buildings that were never built, in a house that makes as little sense as possible, with an inverted roof and wallpaper on the outside and a garage door that opens inside out. Be sure to walk over there if you get a chance. Bombay Beach is different, not because we're smarter or purer than anyone else, but because the market has already abandoned this place. The normal incentive structures don't operate here. Nobody's getting rich, nobody's optimizing, the land is too toxic, the infrastructure too fragile, the location too remote for the usual extractive machinery to bother with it. And in that abandonment, in that failure of the market, a genuine space for experimentation has opened up. It is exactly the space Nietzsche envisioned when he wrote about the death of God, creating the possibility for the revaluation of all values. When the old framework collapses, you don't rebuild the same framework. You ask for the first time, honestly, what do we actually value? What matters? How do we want to live together? These are the questions we are asking in Bombay Beach, not theoretically, practically, and every single day. I want to say something about how we relate to this landscape, because I think it matters philosophically. When I bring people here for the first time, their initial response is almost always pity, horror, or aestheticized pleasure. The beauty of ruin seen safely from the distance of someone who doesn't have to stay here. None of these responses is adequate. Pity turns the residents into objects. Horror treats decay as merely negative. And aestheticized pleasure extracts value without any reciprocity, which is the same extractive logic that destroyed this place to begin with. What we've tried to cultivate instead, and what I think the long-term residents of Bombay Beach have always practiced, whether they'd use this language or not, is something closer to Nietzsche's amor fati, love of fate. Not loving this place despite its ruin, nor because of it, but through it. We didn't come here to fix Bombay Beach. We didn't come here to restore it to some imagined previous golden age. We came because the ruin itself revealed something that intact, functioning, successful places keep hidden: the fragility of everything that we build, the impermanence of every promise, the absurdity and beauty of continuing to live and create in full knowledge of that impermanence. One of our early Biennale themes was the art of decay. Another was God's silence. Hopefully, these weren't just clever curatorial concepts. Rather, they describe the actual experience of being here. You feel the decay in the crumbling walls and the shrinking sea. You hear God's silence in the vast desert quiet, broken only by trains and wind. And in that silence, in that decay, something else becomes audible: the sound of people choosing to be here anyway, to make art anyway, to gather and think and argue and celebrate anyway. And this is where Nietzsche's most vertiginous idea finds its most literal expression. The cycles of life and death, of decay and regeneration, are eternally recurrent here. We ask artists to make quote unquote permanent work in Bombay Beach. But of course, that's an impossible ask. The salt eats everything, installations crumble, the work faces 120-degree heat, 100-mile-per-hour winds, theft, vandalism, paintings fade, and yet artists keep coming. Hundreds of us now. Keep building, keep creating work that we know the desert will eventually reclaim. This is eternal recurrence, the same creative act repeated in full knowledge that it will be undone, affirmed anyway. To live here is to constantly affirm that a life lived honestly in a broken place is more real, more alive, more philosophically serious than a life lived comfortably in a place whose brokenness has been carefully concealed. Let me tell you what it's actually like when things are working here, because theory without experience is exactly what Nietzsche warned us against. The desert is pure Apollonian form. Stark geometry, harsh clarity, merciless light. The grid of Bombay Beach is perfectly square. 5 avenues running east-west, numbered streets running north-south, as if it was New York City. In a place where you could easily build in every direction, instead it's like a medieval walled village, like the ones where I'm from in Italy. We have our wall is this berm that you see out here. And into this absurdity, every season we bring the Dionysian: opera singers whose voices carry across the Salton Sea at dusk, flamenco dancers raising clouds of alkaline dust from vacant lots, philosophers debating consciousness in abandoned buildings we call the Department of Redundancy Department, readings at the Poetry House, another abandoned trailer, Nietzsche conferences in a shipping container above another shipping container, which is called the Bombay Beach Museum of Bombay Beach, which I invite you all to look at downstairs. Community dinners where academics sit next to desert rats, where the conversation moves from Heidegger to water rights to the best way to patch a leaking roof in this salty air. These gatherings are not a festival in the usual sense. There's no VIP section, there's no sponsors' logos, there's no gift bags. What there is instead is an intensity of presence that I believe has become genuinely rare in our mediated, optimized, algorithmically curated world. You have to come here in your body. You have to tolerate the heat, the dust, the smell. You have to be willing to sit in a folding chair in the desert and listen to someone say something that might change your mind. Nietzsche despised comfort. He despised anything that made life frictionless and easy. He wanted philosophy lived in our bodies, in the world, in the face of difficulty. He wanted us, as he wrote, to dance near abysses. We have our own abyss. It's called the Salton Sea, and we dance near it. This conference and your presence here are part of that dance. So what are we actually trying to do? The Bombay Beach Biennale and the Bombay Beach Institute are an attempt to practice what Nietzsche preached: the revaluation of all values. Not theoretically, but in praxis, through the daily, messy, contradictory work of building community on ground that won't stay still. The San Andreas Fault literally starts or ends, depending how you want to look at it, right here in Bombay Beach. Concretely, this means we host philosophy conferences and community dinners in the same spaces. We run artist residencies where the quote unquote studio might be a rehabilitated trailer. We organize volunteer efforts to clean up abandoned lots and then install art on them. We curate performances that bring world-class musicians to play for an audience of 200 in a town with not even one hotel. We are building, with Dulcinea at the helm as executive director, a cultural laboratory that takes the biggest questions about value, about community, about environmental collapse, about what it means to live in this damaged world, and forces them to confront material reality. The revaluation works like this. The dominant culture says value is measured by market price, by efficiency, and by growth. We say value is measured by intensity of engagement, by depth of contradiction honestly inhabited, by the quality of attention people bring to a place and to each other. The dominant culture says a ruined town by a toxic lake is worthless. We say it's one of the most valuable landscapes in America, precisely because the old metrics of value have failed here, and new ones must be invented. Is this Nietzschean? I think it is. Nietzsche never provided a catalog of the new values to replace the old ones. He provided something more important, the insistence that values must be created, not discovered, that they emerge from the conditions of a particular life, a particular place, a particular community of people grappling honestly with their circumstances. The values of Bombay Beach can't be exported as a template. They can only be lived here by us in this specific and unrepeatable situation. But, and this is where I think the experiment matters beyond our little square town grid, the method is transferable. The willingness to build on questionable foundations, the refusal to wait for certainty before acting, the embrace of contradiction as a way of knowing, the commitment to creating rather than consuming. These are practices that any community can adopt in any landscape where the old promises have failed. And the old promises are failing everywhere. We just happen to be in a place where the failure is impossible to ignore. I want to close with the question that I've been thinking about since I was 18 years old, writing my first Nietzsche paper. In that paper, I argued for brief habits over unconditional commitments, for constant overcoming over fixed identities. I ended with a question I couldn't answer. I said, isn't Nietzsche's commitment to growth itself a kind of unconditional commitment? Doesn't the philosopher who rejects all foundations end up standing on one, the foundations of foundationlessness? I think Heidegger then thought the same thing, but I didn't know it at the time. I found all my old papers the other day, and I wrote, when I was 18, I think to answer this question would require another essay, so I'll stop writing until next time. Well, now it's next time. And I've been working on the answer for the last 32 years. Here's what I think. The opposition between groundlessness and groundedness and groundlessness, between having a foundation and not having one, is itself something that needs to be overcome. The real Nietzschean move is not to choose groundlessness over ground, it's to build on groundlessness, to let the absence of foundation become the foundation, not in some clever paradoxical way, but practically, daily, in the way that you make decisions and build structures and sustain relationships and show up for community. Bombay Beach has taught me this. You cannot build here in the way you build in stable, well-funded, properly zoned places. Everything you build might sink. Every plan might fail. The sea will continue to shrink. The dust will worsen. The county probably won't fix the roads again. They might red tag us and make us take it all down. The money might not come. And yet, we build anyway. Not because we're optimists, although we are. At least I am. I've been accused of being pathologically optimistic. But because the building itself is the point. The movement is the point. The process of creating in conditions of radical uncertainty is itself the highest affirmation of life. I think this is what Nietzsche actually wanted us to practice, even when his theory sometimes pointed elsewhere. His commitment was not to a particular doctrine or a fixed set of values, it was to the relentless activity of creation and revaluation itself. The activity has no foundation, it needs none, it is its own justification. My father was an Italian prince, a poet, a man who lived by the conviction that life is beautiful even in darkness. He wrote a poem, a very short one, that's now engraved on his tomb in the village of Vignanello, north of Rome. I'd like to read it to you because I think it says what I've been trying to say more simply and more beautifully than I can manage. I get emotional with this because of my dad. He'd be 102 today, this year. Cammino e sono come l'onda del mare, immota nel moto, immota nel tempo. Cammino senza voler arrivare, la mia meta l'infinito, la mia realtà il camminare. Which translates to, I walk and I'm like a wave in the sea, motionless in motion, motionless in time. I walk without wanting to arrive. My destination is the infinite. My reality is walking. The destination is the infinite. The reality is the walking. The ground is questionable, and we build anyway. Thank you. I look forward to your questions and to spending the rest of this conference together on this improbable and questionable ground. Go ahead.
I can moderate, yeah.
Yes.
I'm assigned moderator, so I'm going to moderate everything, including my own talk, I think.
I just want to encourage us maybe to go on a walk.
Well, let's go.
But let's do like 10 minutes or like let's do like a
Up to you, I don't care.
yeah, let's go till 5:30 and then we can go for a stroll before dinner. How's that?
Sounds good.
It's 5:18 now.
Oh yeah, but like anyone can ask questions, right? Or...
Yeah, of course. But the philosophers should go first because they're the ones who are new here. That's what we told everyone.
We did. Right?
That's the rule we made.
I know we made. Yeah.
That's the value we created.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, I'll just ask. Or did you have a question first, Paul?
You can go first. I'll go second.
Sure. You know, it's kind of a practical question. I know a bit about Bombay, and the more it keeps going, the more it grows, and it seems like the more opportunities there are for like commodification, the tougher it is to stay here for the Biennale. And so, how do you manage those sorts of pressures, or like what do you do?
If
Right? Like how do you maintain the spirit of Bombay when those sorts of things are happening?
it's the impossible question
I
that
know,
we have to
sorry.
keep answering
Yeah.
constantly.
Right.
But no, it's like we grapple with it every day. We don't like sweep it under the rug.
Oh no, I'm sure.
But you know, how do you encourage this place to become more and more international and more desirable? Without there's art that responds to it. Like if you look back there where that little red is peeking out, that's the a Monopoly board piece, and that if Bombay Beach, since it's on a square, if it were a Monopoly board, that would be Park Place, and there's a giant life-size Park Place Monopoly board piece there, and so I think that's a great art isn't a good answer because that's like a very cutting commentary on what has happened a little bit. It's turned into like a fight for the real estate and the values have gone up and so how do you undermine that and also acknowledge it at the same time? I think making art about it is one way. And go ahead, do you have an answer to this?
And I also think we're, in addition to making art about it, pursuing things like community land trusts and actively doing back channel deals to make sure that the property values don't actually go up on a recorded value. There's a lot of things other than art that a certain select network, not everybody, a certain select network of people are doing to combat what is actually just gentrification, but in a sort of like joke. It's like the caricature of gentrification, but it is also very real, and it's a problem that we need to keep negotiating. But more than art, too.
Yeah, agreed. What she said.
Yeah. I was gonna ask about the like groundlessness stuff from your early essay. So Nietzsche was talking about the brief habits. You said you were really attracted to the brief habits, and the sort of like dipping into activities and not being stuck in them, not being committed to them. But then you said that you were drawn to Bombay Beach, and you sort of keep returning here. Keep how do you see those things as? Are you shifting to this view where, um, in addition to like the brief habits and the transitions and things like that, that kind of rootedness or groundedness over long stretches of time is important.
I think what I was trying to say is that we've got to inhabit the tension as much as
Yeah.
possible. I still love the idea of brief habits. I think we I think like we don't want to become a slave to our commitments or our
Yeah.
fanaticisms, as you've so well eloquently put it in your paper, which I loved, by the way.
Thanks.
But I think it's another one of these questions that we just have to continually grapple with every day. And because I mean, Nietzsche does say that the brief habit, when it comes, you think, now this is it. This is the one that is
Yeah.
not gonna be brief. I'm gonna live with this forever. And then and then he contrasts it with what he also would find intolerable. He says is the a constant improvisation, right?
Yeah.
So I think that we're just I'm inhabiting that tension of like feeling very committed to this place, not wanting to leave it ever. Not I can't imagine leaving it, but at the same time, you never know. It might change so much that you leave it because it leaves you because it's no longer recognizable. That's a real danger, right? How do we like preserve it in its soul and its essence?
Yes, Scott.
One paradox or contradiction in your talk that struck me was your description of your own groundless optimism. So I'd like to hear you say just a little bit more about that. How do you have any views on how we cultivate optimism and when we've got, in a certain sense, no right to?
No right to it, right? Well, one is just luck. I think I just like have biological,
Yeah.
predisposition to optimism. So I don't know if I could convince somebody who's like, my favorite definition of the difference between a pessimist and an optimist is that the pessimist says that the optimist says this is the best of all possible worlds, and the pessimist fears that that's true. Um, so I don't think you can convince someone with a dreary disposition to be optimistic, but I do think that if you can find optimism in a place like this, it's going to be a lot more. It's going to be deeper and more authentic and more lasting than it is in a place where everything looks like it's okay, and actually it's hell on earth. I mean, I think the biggest contrast class to this place is one of those gated communities where all the houses are the same, for example, right? And everything is safe and predictable. And I think that I would have a harder time being optimistic in that environment than in a place where change is possible. So here, where everything's gone wrong, at least you feel like you can have an impact, and it's also small enough that you can affect change. I think that we're faced with like ecological issues here that we can actually have an impact on through our choices. We can plant gardens and grow food and become involved in local politics and do all of these things that actually make a difference. Whereas in the rest of the world, you're just given this issue of climate change, and what are you supposed to do? Like buy a Prius? And that's like it feels very hopeless. Recycle, be a good citizen. Of course, you should do all those things, but I think it's harder to feel like your choices aren't either just corporations exploiting your guilt or just like too small to make an actual difference. So that's why I come to a place like this.
I'm gonna put a finger on it because I just can. The finger, it's just a proposal. I agree that you can't get someone who doesn't have a sunny disposition to you can't convince them to be optimistic. But maybe there's something in your story about how you were like really drawn to Bombay and gripped by Bombay and came to love Bombay. It's like that can like point us in the direction of like the conditions of developed optimism, not necessarily like lifelong and lasting optimism, but at least like an optimistic outlook. It's so like one thing that makes us like extremely optimistic is love,
Yeah.
right? And it isn't just true of a place; it's true of
Good.
a cause. It's true of a person, and so there is something to say there, right? So maybe something if you want to like I don't know. You can say more about optimism than that. I think.
Yeah, I think
Maybe
falling
if
for
you-
something that guides your, that gives you purpose, that definitely helps, and that's the hardest thing that we're combating personally. You know, doom scrolling and you know, everything that creates a more passive existence is the opposite of what you're talking about. Whereas when you have something that you fall in love with, that starts to guide your choices and challenge you and pushes back, I definitely think that's a thing that in common between the brief habits and the unconditional commitments. I think both exert force back on you in a way that it's not just you. Um, you know, if you have, I think that those, that world that we're contrasting with this one, where like nature is totally responding to, or either non-existent or it's just responding to our will. It's like it doesn't push back in a way that's meaningful. And I think Ian Thompson says in this film I made, Being in the World, you're a king without a castle, you're a sovereign in a land of nothing, if the world doesn't push back in a meaningful way. So I think that here you have not only your actions make a difference, but the earth is pushing back in a way that's meaningful, right? You're dealing with specific environmental conditions, you're dealing with specific people in the community. You have to get to know each individual person because everyone's so eccentric and everyone has such big personalities here. So it's like it's paradoxically a community of rugged individuals. So you have this kind of that tension between communal living and kind of desert, you know, libertarian individualism happening, all contained in this little box. Yeah.
Contradictions here, and I'm wondering that space makes you think about action, especially on something like the Salton Sea. It seems like it presents dilemmas for any kind of like large action, right? In terms of trying to get water to it, the cost of that versus allowing the Salton Sea to dry up. So I'm wondering, what.
We started a GoFundMe for $1 billion the other day to save the sea. We have $1 so far. That's the maximum it lets you put on GoFundMe. I was curious, so
Yeah, like something that on the one hand presents a call for some kind of action, but it's unclear what it would be.
No, I mean,
it sort of calls, and yet you don't know what it's.
yeah, and I think there's this large amorphous, like I called it in the paper, an abyss there that's very different from this town, right? And that this is contained, and you can see how you could, you know, fix things. Although again, that's complicated because you don't want to fix them too much. Stefan said once, if it was any less horrible, it would suck. So you know, that all that's very careful. But yeah, that's a bigger problem than this problem. And it's dependent on larger governmental forces, and you know, one of our hopes is to bring attention to it. Like the fact that I lived most of my life in LA seeking out strange places and didn't know this existed is so shocking to me. And I think we really have helped put the place on the map. And again, that's for better or worse. But in the better sense, I think it's like bringing attention to it could start those political wheels moving. Probably not in this administration, but maybe in future ones, you know?
Toby.
Yeah, I was just thinking two themes which I think kind of which this space really does bring out: genealogy and redemption. So seeing the strands of history and how they can be linked to the way that people also deal uncomfortable bits. And one of the really uncomfortable bits with the genealogy is the way that he insists on glorifying, and he's seeing in some glorified light the elements and the parts that we find. So both with the kind of blonde figures that he doesn't just endorse them, he does paint them in a glowing light and certain passages.
Yeah.
Even with Christianity upwards, I think he paints it in quite a glowing light. He criticizes it. So I wonder how much this project, which depended on this initial exploitation
And catastrophe. Yeah.
recast that. And so if we see people building a Bombay Beach, fresh as in, a new resort town with some unspoiled wilderness, does it force us to also see some kind of positive and some hope that something interesting, amazing, even catastrophic will kind of come out of it?
It's a good question.
Oh wow.
Oh, we have to go. Saved by the bell. Thanks, guys.